All right, so welcome. My name is Liz Herman, and I'm a trainer and programs analyst with Earthsoft. And what we'll be discussing today is what's new in EQuiS DQM version 6.6. All right, so the agenda for today is to talk through some of the enhancements that we added in DQM version 6.6. We'll highlight some of our new and improved checks, the changes to our user interface and the navigation, which includes changes to our workflow that essentially allow you to create unique events in your various qualification projects and then pause them if necessary and come back to them later. And finally, some history form changes that happened as well. Okay. The changes that happened to the DQM Schema Update include some new tables and fields that were introduced and changed. There are some existing tables that we just made a couple of changes to, as well as a few different tables that we created from scratch, essentially. So some of the fields that were added to DT Result DQM include the apply qualifier and apply remark, so that that information can end up being saved in that Result DQM table. We also created a couple of new tables. One of them is an associative table, which is AT DQM result, as well as a new table, which is RT DQM control limits. And the RT DQM control limits table was created essentially to allow users to manage their QAP-specific control limits in EQuiS. So we recognize that not always does a laboratory provide the exact control limits that you need, whether it's an error on their part or maybe you have a project that has QAP-specific control limits. This particular table will allow you to manage the control limits for things like your spike recoveries and surrogate recoveries, as well as your relative percent difference data. Okay, and so you can manage that based on your project-specific QAP and have several different sets in there if you want to. But if you don't need to have that extra layer of specificity, you don't have to. If you don't have any data related to a specific QAP in that table, then DQM will say, oh, there's nothing there, and then just default to those values provided by the laboratory in DT Result QC. Okay? All right, so some of the improved checks that we have introduced for some of the existing checks that we have, they've been refined for clarity. So first off, we separated out our surrogate recoveries and spike recoveries into two separate checks. So you can manage your flagging to be different depending on what kind of sample type has some sort of spike recovery exceedance. For the relative percent difference check, we reorganized it so that you can process LCS, LCSD, MSMSD, and lab duplicates individually. So again, your flagging criteria can be slightly different for any sort of RPD changes or issues that might have happened for each of those various sample types. And because of that, the event summary now lists each evaluation separately so that it's easier to review and understand the information that you're going through. Okay, so the duplicate results check was refined to better compare your duplicate instances of results. So essentially what it does is it'll look in DT result and see if more than one result exists with the same combination of sample ID, analytic method, CAS number, and fraction. And if it does, it'll allow you to essentially say, which one of these do I want to be the actual reported result, and which one do I want to set to not reportable. So if you've got a circumstance where you maybe got an initial analysis plus a dilution that was outside of hold, or perhaps a re-extraction or reanalysis or something like that, with this duplicate results check, you can identify those duplicate results and then later determine which one you want to have set as your actual reportable result. Okay. And finally, we split out that demo DQM settings EDD to actually be 3 separate QAP sections for our 3 different, essentially, families of our different check types. So we've got one section which is the lab data audit checks, and those can include the numeric results, percent solids, repeated results, which also happens to be in our standard checks, as well as verify sample units. And that's sort of in preparation of a little hint dropped in here now for some changes that we're going to be introducing in EQuiS 7. But in addition to that, we also, of course, have our radiochemistry data checks as well as our standard checks. So when you're setting up your individual QAPs, for your particular projects. You don't necessarily have to have them separated like we've done, but you certainly can manage it that way as well. So the next thing that I want to talk through is the new workflow, and I have some slides that I'll show you so I can highlight some particular areas, and then we'll actually show you what it looks like in real life, in professional. But essentially the new workflow allows you to make each validation effort a distinct event. So the process is you create an event with that Create Event button right up here in that new section of the DQM ribbon. And when you create the event, you pick your target either task, lab or field, SDG, or batch. Or you can select several of those if you want, if you need to narrow your focus. Then you can select your wildcard QC samples, and that's my term, the wildcard QC, meaning you might have maybe an equipment blank that exists for an entire sampling effort for a quarter or something like that, that might not be in the target task or something. You can certainly cherry pick that particular QC sample so that any sort of flagging criteria that might be applied because of that can be applied to your related samples. Okay, and then you select your targeted QAP and checks. And then once you've made all of those selections to your preferences, you create your event and save it as an in-process event. And from that in-process event, you can review the DQM flags either by the checks that you've selected, by individual samples, or some additional filters that are available. And then, of course, you can save those in-progress events to return later, because we recognize that you certainly, some of the bigger validation efforts can take several days, and it's good to be able to put a pin in it and then come back later. And finally, if you've completed an event, you can actually reopen it for whatever reason you might need to, whether it means the laboratory has done an internal data audit and they've discovered that there's some issues with some data that they've reported, or if it's because of, maybe you just got some more information from the field or something like that. Okay. So let's take a look at what this actually looks like. So this is the new DQM Create Event page. And so the first thing that you need to do is select your target set of data, whether that's by SDG, chain of custody, batch, or task. And when you make your selections that you've selected create or appear in that upper ribbon where you see those boxes highlighted there. Okay, so once that's finished, you get a chance to select which QAP you want to qualify the data by and the individual checks that you need to have run against that data. And then finally, you create your event. Okay, so that's step one in the new workflow. In step two, you are in the in-process event, and this is actually a screenshot of before the in-process event has even been saved. But there are a handful of different tabs within the in-process event that show you some information to give you lots of details about the data set that you're looking to qualify. The first thing that's a big change from previous versions is our event summary. So you can see not only the QAP that you picked, but in addition you see the number of results that were reviewed and each of the results that were applicable to each of the checks that you selected. You can see the number of exceptions that occurred for each of the checks that you picked. Any sort of association methods, if you have a check that is going to flag associated results like trip blanks or things like that. And then it'll also tell you the number of associated results. So this is really the bird's eye view of your in-process event. The next tab is the exceptions by check, and that allows you to check out each of the exceptions individually. You can see that we have this holding times that's been selected here in that DQM check, but all of the checks that you selected when you created the event are available in that drop-down window. So you can sort of scroll through and toggle through to see each of the exceptions by each of the violation sets that you've selected. And in addition, you can review and change those suggested qualifiers for each exception. So if you've got, your professional judgment says, well, I know that DQM is suggesting that this flag be applied. It's okay, I'll go ahead and give it a different flag, that kind of thing. Okay. The next tab is the Review All Results tab, and that allows you to essentially check out every single piece of data that was returned by the selections, those parameter selections you made when you created the event, including data that wasn't flagged by DQM. And you can also, in any of these views, filter the returned results to narrow your focus. So in this set, it looks like we've filtered down by method 8082, just looking at target analytes. And we can see maybe a little bit more focused piece of information in terms of that for the way that the reviewing the flags might work. And perhaps you might see that some of the flags need to be changed. It looks like in this particular circumstance, the surrogate recovery was below the between the lower surrogate cutoff and below the lower control limit. And so maybe we would decide to change our qualifiers accordingly. Okay, so all of that information is coming from the apply remark field, why it decided to make that particular selection. So you can update those applied qualifiers and set it as it is. The next tab is the Review Samples tab. And from here, you can check out sample details, the results related to those samples, and any flags that might have been suggested by DQM on a sample-by-sample basis. So in this particular selection, you can see that the field duplicate sample has been chosen. You can see that it is associated with sysloc code B30. So even though it's a blind dupe, we are getting that piece of information here from that sysloc code field. And if I look a little bit further to the right, I can even see what the parent sample code is in that main sample window. And then if I come on down to this lower section, I can see every single result related to that particular sample. If I needed to see more details, I could click on perhaps this first row for that 8260 ethyl benzene result, and the additional details would show up in this lower right area right here, telling us the specifics for the results for that particular analyte. Finally, the last tab is the Errors tab, and this will tell you anytime there was an issue when DQM tried to apply a flag but ran into a problem, whether it's because we're missing, in this case, a holding time set for collection to analysis unpreserved, or if perhaps we're missing RPD control limits, either in our RTDQM control limit table or in DT result QC as we see here. And so essentially what we can see here is say, oh gosh, looks like we don't have maybe all the information I need in the project QAP, or maybe I need to go back to the laboratory and say, why didn't you give me the control limits that I'm expecting to see for these samples? You know, that kind of thing. So these errors allow you to view and sort of make sure that you're going to be getting all of the flags that you should be getting, that it's catching all of the data that it needs to. Now, one thing that needs to be noted is if you have errors that show up in this tab when you first create the event, that's sort of notifying you that there's an issue. But when you save the event, these errors don't end up being saved. There's a record of the fact that there were errors, but the individual errors themselves aren't saved into DQM. Okay. So once you have saved the event, you get an in-process event with a unique name that you can return to later to finish your validation project if you need to. And so you see here our DQM event name is my initials plus office hours 1. Yep. So that's essentially what we're looking at with each of the events. And like I said, it's a unique name that you can choose, so you can name it something far more meaningful than that. But once you have saved that event and you're happy with all of the qualifier changes you've made, you can select this Complete Event button right here, and that will take you to the DQM Complete Event window. And this is where you get to choose how and where to apply your qualifiers. So the 3 boxes that we have highlighted here show us how we want to apply those, whether we want those to end up in the interpreted qualifiers, in validator qualifiers, and what sets of flags we want to be included. So with the boxes that we have checked here, it looks like we're going to be merging and saving the lab qualifiers and the apply qualifiers into the interpreted qualifier field, and nothing into the validator qualifiers field. Okay. And then that 3rd box on the bottom allows us to apply additional changes to the data, whether we want to mark the results as validated yes, no, if we want to change any detection flags, if we have a non-detect result qualifier that shows up, like a U flag, for example. If you want to change your reportable result to not reportable if you have a rejected result qualifier. And then we have a new check or a new change in our validation process, and that's that second from the bottom, that this box right here, where you can change the detected result value depending on if you have a non-detect result qualifier there. You can actually set your not detect detection limit if you need to. Okay. And then finally, once you've made all of those selections, it allows you to save and apply those qualifiers according to whatever preferences you might have. Okay. So once you've saved and completed that event and saved and applied your qualifiers and all of that, you can export the details from your event. And this essentially replaces the export report that has been available in previous versions with an enhanced report that has a better output in Excel that includes the error summaries as well as some additional details for each of the checks that have been applied. And sort of following on that, in addition, we have added support for EIAs with the DQM qualification report. We actually changed the name of the report. It's now called the DQM Exceptions Report by EDD. So if you were to publish that report DLL, that's what it would be called in your reports window. And the report format has improved significantly. I can show you what that looks like here in just a bit. But you've got a screenshot here on screen with the details of just the summary page of that report. You can see that we've got information regarding the details for the facility, the name of the DQM event, the QAP, and all of the various selections that I made when I was creating this validation event, as well as, again, the overview of all of our results and the flags that were suggested and then applied. Okay. And the EIA was the support for the EIA was created to allow you to set up EIAs to alert users when data comes in that might have data issues. So you can get an eye on it quicker, maybe ask the laboratory to take a look at it before sample volume might be disposed or something like that. So hopefully that'll help sort of smooth the process and the workflow in terms of validation efforts, since that often is something that happens after all of the sample volume has been disposed of. All right, so the next thing that I wanted to show you before we actually hop into the demonstration is the history form. And so the history form in DQM has changed as well. So you can still review previous validation events. You can actually open the event up so that it looks like it's in process, but it's not really, just so you can sort of go through that same kind of in-process window. So it's a more familiar feel in reviewing any of the validation processes. And you can also actually reopen closed and finished completed events. So as I said earlier, if you have to revisit a validation for whatever reason, it's easy enough to open that and then reprocess it. Okay? So with that, we can move on to our demonstration. I'll go ahead and switch over to EQuIS Professional. And I've got DQM up here on screen, or a couple of windows that I want to show you briefly. The first is the DQM settings, and you'll notice that this looks pretty much exactly the same as it did before, with the exception of the additional QAPs, example QAPs that have been introduced. So if you had the DQM settings pretty well in hand before, there's not really a lot of changes to that, with the exception of the introduction of our RT DQM control limits table. And this table allows you, as I said before, to add your QAP code and matrix code information and essentially define all sorts of additional information in terms of your requirements for your QC, whether you want to have your LCS, upper and lower cutoff recovery sets, MSMSDs, duplicates, surrogates, and the like. We even have a field that will allow you to associate your surrogates by CAS number. I don't believe that that is supported in version 6.6, but it's sort of like a getting ready to support it in EQuIS 7. Okay. But so let's go ahead and open an in-process event rather than create a new event. So I'm going to click the in-process events button, and it opened on my other screen. What this does is opens an entirely new window. So this is a new part to DQM as well, that your processing of validation events actually happens sort of in a window outside of professional. So you can see that we have two different events that are in this particular database, one that Jim created on the 16th and the one that I created yesterday. So let's pick the one that I created yesterday. You can see, again, the event summary in this lower quadrant down here. But if I come up to that great big reopen event button, so it'll reopen the event for me so that I can go through and check out not only the event summary, but review things like the exceptions by check. So it looks like this matrix spike duplicate had a problem with RPD. If I highlight that apply remark, it says there's a high RPD between the laboratory replicate and parent sample. And then you can see more details for that over here in this right panel. So if I'm happy with that flag, I can certainly leave it as that J, or I can come in here and change it. Maybe I want to make it a Q for whatever reason. That'll essentially update that particular flag. And then I can come through. Oh, Q is not a good choice. It's not in my qualifier database. But notice when I tried to change it to Q, DQM hollered at me and said, hey, you're trying to step outside of your database vocabulary, outside of your reference values. So it will control, it does have a lookup to your qualifier fields. Okay, so you can also select your various different exceptions. So we've got a couple of exceptions that showed up here for surrogate recovery. And again, we can review the results. Yes, I do want to leave without saving changes. Sorry, I have to reopen, or back on my other window again. But so essentially, we could check out the review all results, and again, we can filter that data using this white field up here. So if I wanted to just see maybe 8260 data, just type in SW8260. Maybe I only want to see data that's non-detect for whatever reason. Now I can see all of that information. Finally, there's the Review Samples tab. So we could look at the details on a sample-by-sample basis rather than on an all-results basis, as I mentioned before. So I can check out B30 and maybe this ethylbenzene data, and again, the additional details for that show up in this right panel over here, so I can check out, what the reporting detection limit was, the report result text, and all of that. And finally, as I said before, if there are errors that occur when you create a particular event, which this one actually did have errors, once you save that in-process event, this errors tab ends up being wiped out. So it's important, if you're going to address errors during your validation effort, that you do it before you save the in-process event, or you'll lose that information. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to show you is the DQM history. So once again, when I click this button, I'm sure it's going to end up, on my other screen. So stand by while I pull that guy up. And so here's what the DQM history window looks like. You can see that I completed validation on this package yesterday, and I applied some qualifiers based on what DQM suggested. So I can either reopen the event with that reopen event button, or I could just check out the details with the view event, and once more, it's down here on my other screen. So it happens when I use my secondary screen as my presentation. Okay, so here we can see this is the completed event, and you can tell it's completed because the save in process and complete is all grayed out. But the same information that we saw in one of those in-process events is still available from the completed event. So it's like comparing apples to apples, just one of the apples happens to be completed. Okay, so that really is all of the things that I wanted to show you in DQM itself, and see if there's any questions. So it looks like Martha has a question. Can you select multiple field SDGs for the create event option? I believe you can. Jim, can you confirm?
Yes, you can select multiple field SDGs, and you can also combine selecting field SDG and lab SDGs or task codes, and it's an additive process, so it'll take everything and add it together from those multiple selections. And one of the things in particular is, for example, you might have a say a trip blank that applies to more than one lab SDG, and so you can select your lab SDGs and then go down and select that individual trip blank sample, and that will all be included then in that event. And that trip blank then could be selected for other events. Also, the selecting a sample for an event does not preclude it from being included in other events.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Jim. Kevin asks, can we select all retests in a selection and review the initial results to determine which should be reportable? That's a good question, Kevin. It sort of depends. That essentially could be handled by the duplicate results check under settings, or sorry, repeated results rather. This essentially, if you remember what I was talking about earlier, will allow you to, let me go back to that slide. It explains it relatively well. It basically allows the checks to, here we go. It will compare your any instance in art or in DT result where you have a sample ID, analytic method, cast number, and fraction that have the same combination, so that it's sort of excluding looking at either like initial dilution, re-extraction, or reanalysis for your sample. What is that sample type? Result type code, I think. So yes, you can see that information. Within the DQM interface, it's kind of tricky to be able to tell which one is which. That will be fixed in EQuIS 7. But it'll certainly allow you to see all of the instances where you have a sample ID, analytic method, CAS-RN, and fraction combination that are duplicated.
And if I could insert, we're fixing the difficulty is there currently is no way to make to select one of those batches, one group of results. You can definitely see both results, but if you have 68 analytes, well, then that's a lot of manual changing. So the improvement that we'll make is we're going to add some filter columns, so you'll be able to separate the initial result from the retest. And that might even come out before EQuIS 7. We're thinking about having a middle of the year DQM release to get a few of those little fixes in there.
Excellent. Thanks, Jim. Okay, and Ed asks, don't we use test type in the unique ID of a result? Yes, within EQuIS, yes, but DQM actually will exclude that piece of information when it's checking out the repeated results to check for just such an instance where you might have, maybe a sample that's out of range but in hold, and then is reanalyzed out of hold but in range, and so you get an opportunity to look at those two values and determine which one you want to have as your reportable versus non-reportable results. So it is a uniqueness ID for in terms of the schema for EQuIS, but not in terms of that DQM check. So good question. So that is how they're linked. They're linked with that combination of I can't remember the 4 combination on the top of my head. The sample ID, analytic method, cast number, fraction. So it's not looking at the batch ID information or at the test type, I believe. We've got the full EQuIS Professional version 6.6 release notes that you can check out. Within there are the set of DQM changes. There's probably 2 pages worth or so of changes detailing a little bit further some of the things that have been changed. So I do encourage you to check those out just to see the details in some of those fixes. Ed asks, what is EQuIS 7 going to smell like? That's a good question, and there's actually, we're planning big changes. I don't know, Jim, if you want to make any more comments about that, or if we're going to have a product advisory forum about that, or what.
It's going to smell like coffee and chocolate. DQM version 7, it's just going to have several of the things that we added to the schema but didn't get added into the functionality. For example, there's a new column for non-detect qualifiers, so that you'll be able to have a different qualifier for non-detect samples versus detected concentrations. And that column exists in the schema, but we didn't get it added to the functionality yet. So that will be in there. That really fancy column in the new RT control limits table currently is not being used, and so we'll start using that, which will allow incredible flexibility and specific, however you say, specificity.
Specificity.
Yeah.
He asked, how about result inventory and expected result counts versus actual result numbers?
So that's something that is already available with SPM, and that brings up the fact that the other thing we'll be adding is DQM and SPM will start to talk to each other, and so you'll be able to access the. Right now, DQM doesn't know how many results are expected. But when we connect that to SPM, that's exactly the kind of thing that SPM will, and that's what we'll do. So two things. One is we'll be able to look up what the expected result counts are. When that report already kind of exists, we'll just have to connect that into the DQM module. But also then this whole thing about rejecting some results, and we'll do that, we'll allow you to do that through the SPM, what's called SRN manager.
Sample receipt notification.
Thank you. That one. And so when you find a problem in DQM, then you'll be able to send that information into the SPM SRN manager and send a new, either send a new analysis request to the lab, or send a re-sample request to your field people. So we're going to be tying those two modules together so they kind of complete the circle. And we'll certainly be having some events where we're looking for input on that, but don't wait. You know, feel free to either post something on the forum. There is a DQM section on the forum, and I look at that every once a month to see if anyone's put anything new up there. So if you want to spell out in more detail your questions and ideas, we're always open for that.
And one other thing that we're adding that Jim didn't mention is sort of more of a data sanity check kind of module, hopefully, that'll allow you to look for maybe more of like a data quality rather than qualification kind of deal. And that's still in early development as well. So that'll be nice to be able to say, hey, my dissolve results are more than my total, or something like that.
Right, and again, that will be how we tie, you know, that'll be one of the things that ties back to SPM. So right now, you don't really want to qualify that data. You want to go back to the lab. We're talking about some very different kinds of things. But we've separated them out already into what we call the lab data audit QOP, just because we think those checks are more something you don't really want to qualify your data. You want to say, send it back to the lab and say, get this right. And so, so I think we'll be adding several sections to that process and a new mechanism.
So since I talk faster than I type, let me go and ask you guys a couple of questions. Is there a way right now to go ahead and suck in data in draft mode, essentially, to go ahead and do these kind of reviews, so you can, in a timely fashion, then go ahead and send to the laboratory, hey, you guys need to go and do a reanalysis. I know you still have 3 days on your holding time. You can do that. Please go ahead and do so. In other words, do like a draft, how should I say, a draft data quality evaluation.
Well, there is the EIA functionality, and I don't know if that'll accomplish exactly what you're talking about, but you could set up a trigger that would run this report, and you could see any instance where, maybe they've got repeated results or, surrogate recoveries or whatever, that you could take a quick glance and say, what's the story you didn't reanalyze or whatever. So potentially that will do that for you.
And there are 4 different checks that we moved into the lab data audit QUAP, and then we've already gotten several requests to add some additional checks there. So you can certainly run whatever check already exists, and we will for sure be adding several checks, perhaps before we actually finish the linkage to SPM, that would allow you to do that.
And the checks
semi-automatically, but not fully automatically.
And those checks that are in lab data audit right now are numeric results, percent solids, repeated results, and verify sample units. So you could potentially just run that particular QUAP against it, and it'll spit it out and tell you.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of, from the laboratory perspective, to make it easy for them to go ahead and provide some kind of a minimal deliverable, not the full-blown one, just a reduced set, like, you know, method blanks and really that's all, and the samples to go ahead and shoot that over. So do a very minimal but, you know, important check. So I can
that's
see
an interesting idea. Where you
like a level 1+, basically.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that way you can tell immediately, okay, yeah, you didn't, your blank was high, so that's going to screw us up completely when it comes time for doing the full-blown validation. That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I'll shut up now.
Thanks, Ed. No, that's great. That's great feedback. All right. Well, and as Jim said, we will have an event, or at least one, probably maybe more, discussing how we're going to and how you would like to see things implemented in the future with EQuIS 7 and DQM. So we'll certainly keep an eye on the community forum and the website for any announcements about that, and we'll certainly let you know, because we definitely want your feedback. So. But thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and thanks, Jim, for being here to handle any questions that I didn't know the answers to. So thanks so much, everyone, for your attention, and have a wonderful day.